The second my sister, Livia, called and said, "Take the old mill. It's trash. Mom's expensive jewels are mine," I felt so humiliated. She was trying to put me down, again, after years of being the favorite. But what she didn't know, I was keeping a massive secret. A secret that would turn her trash into a billion-dollar fortune and make her BG for crumbs. But what I did next shut the whole family up. The second Livia's name popped up on my phone screen, I knew exactly what she wanted. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Buenos Aires, trying to look over some quarterly reports, but my stomach was churning. She was 43, 5 years my junior, and sounded like she was announcing the Nobel Prize winner. "Oh, Alara," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I've gone ahead and taken care of the estate division, darling. It was just easier this way." Easier for her, of course. Our parents had died 6 months prior, leaving behind a messy estate with no clear will, a final, passive-aggressive act of non-commitment that perfectly summed up their parenting style. Livia, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, was practically salivating over the assets. Alara, the quiet, focused one who actually ran her own successful consulting firm, was always viewed as the self-sufficient afterthought. "I'm taking the jewels," she announced, the capital J practically audible. She meant the family heirlooms, the collection our grandmother had started. Honestly, I didn't care about the monetary value, I cared about the sapphire necklace Mom had promised me when I was a little girl. Livia knew that. That sapphire was the only thing I truly wanted, not because of the stones, but because of the memory attached to it. "And what about the rest?" I asked, keeping my tone flat, professional. "Don't show weakness, Alara." "Not to her." She sighed, a dramatic flutter over the phone line. "Well, there's that dump of a property, the old mill. Honestly, it's just land, falling apart, miles outside the city. Zero value, really. You can take that. The maintenance alone is a nightmare. The old mill. A dilapidated rural property that hadn't turned a profit since before I was born. It was a running joke in the family, a beautiful ruin that was nothing but a liability." Livia was handing me the trash, keeping the treasure, and feeling incredibly generous for doing so. I could hear the smugness in her voice, she was enjoying this final, official act of superiority. She was making it clear, one last time, who the winner was. I felt that familiar sting of humiliation, the kind that hits you right in the chest. "Fine, Livia. Send the documents and the keys to my office. I accept." That simple acceptance threw her off balance. She'd expected an argument, tears, maybe even me begging for one of the smaller necklaces. But I just said yes. She stammered a quick goodbye, probably already planning which party she'd wear the sapphires to first. A week later, I drove out to the mill. The place was exactly as advertised, rotting wood, overgrown ivy, and an air of forgotten history. It smelled like dust and damp earth. I spent an hour walking through the crumbling structure, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. This was what I got. Before leaving, I stopped by the main fireplace. As a kid, when Mom and Dad would fight, I'd hide here, tracing the stones. My father, bless his distant heart, once told me, "If you ever need me, look in the darkest place." I always thought he meant heaven. I knelt down, brushing away ash and debris. My fingers caught on something loose. It wasn't a stone, it was a small, sealed compartment, perfectly disguised. Inside, I found two things, a worn, leather-bound map, and a brief, coded letter in Dad's familiar handwriting. The letter was cryptic, talking about purity, sustainability, and the future. But the map was the shocker. It wasn't a treasure map leading to buried gold or silver. It was a precise topographical survey, focused entirely on the subterranean structure of the mill's land. My heart hammered against my ribs, suddenly not from anger, but from a terrifying surge of realization. I recognized the symbols and the coordinates. They weren't random, they were part of a specific kind of urban planning I'd studied years ago. The map didn't point to a relic. It pointed to infrastructure. This wasn't a ruin. It was a secret weapon. Livia thought she'd given me the trash. She had just handed me the coordinates to a gold mine she was too blind and too greedy to see. The coordinates on Dad's map confirmed my hunch, and the truth hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. This wasn't just land, this was prime land, strategically positioned. For over a decade, my consulting firm, the one Livia always mocked as boring infrastructure stuff, had tracked the city's long-term plan to develop a new technology hub, a Silicon Valley of our region, miles outside the current downtown. Livia never cared about things like zoning or future development, she cared about diamonds and parties. And the core of the map's secret? It wasn't about the land's surface. It was about the water. Dad's coded letter, once deciphered, talked about purity and sustained flow. The map detailed the location of a perfectly protected, deep-drilled artesian well. It was a massive, untapped source of pure mineral water, sitting directly under the Moinho Velho. Water. Essential and expensive. For a sprawling tech hub requiring massive cooling systems, for the thousands of high-end homes planned, for any large-scale development, water rights and access were gold, silver, and the entire family's jewels combined. This well wasn't just valuable, it was strategic. Without a local, dedicated water source, that tech hub couldn't be built as planned, not without astronomical cost. Livia, in her arrogance, had given me the single most crucial piece of infrastructure necessary for a multi-billion-dollar project. The rush of adrenaline wasn't just about money, it was about justification. For years, I had worked quietly, diligently, while Livia coasted on charm and parental favoritism. Now, my boring expertise was my ultimate weapon. This wasn't just revenge, this was a forced lesson in vision. But I needed capital, and I needed it fast. Securing water licenses and environmental permits is a complex, time-consuming, and brutally expensive process. I couldn't use my main business accounts that would tip off the family and potentially Livia, who had friends in high places, ready to sniff out a deal. I had to keep the Moinho's value a secret, maintain the facade of a useless ruin. This meant a painful sacrifice. I had bought my first apartment when I was 25, the product of my first big salary, sweat, and sheer determination. It was my symbol of independence. Selling it felt like tearing off a piece of my own skin. I signed the papers a week later. It was a cold, clinical transaction. The money hit my account, and I felt a pang of loss, quickly replaced by a surge of resolve. The apartment was a comfortable past, the Moinho was an undeniable future. With the capital secured, I immediately hired a small, trusted team of consultants, all bound by ironclad NDAs. We began the slow, grueling process of permit acquisition. We worked from inside the mill, using generators and keeping the shutters closed, making it look like an abandoned construction site, not a multi-million-dollar business in the making. While I was knee-deep in soil samples and regulatory filings, Livia was posting photos of her lavish parties. She sent me a dismissive email once, asking if the rats at the mill were keeping me company. I replied with one word: busy. She couldn't comprehend that I was busy building an empire out of the trash she'd handed me. She was too focused on the glittering surface of life. Little did she know, the true jewel was buried deep beneath my feet, and she had just financed my digging. The months blurred into a relentless cycle of paperwork, legal battles for zoning variances, and silent, back-breaking construction. I was 48, supposed to be easing into the stability of my career, but I was living like a college student pulling all-nighters. My professional attire was replaced by work boots and dust masks. The constant stress was a physical weight, but the thought of Livia's smug face was my energy drink. Every time I felt like quitting, I remembered the coldness in her voice when she declared the mill zero value. We were meticulous about the facade. The surrounding fence remained rickety, painted with generic keep-out signs. We moved materials and heavy machinery only under the cover of night. From the outside, the Moinho Velho still looked like a place destined for demolition, not a sophisticated, high-tech hub of water infrastructure management. Securing the environmental license for the artesian well was the most critical hurdle. It took 4 months of intense lobbying and proving the water source was sustainable and essential for the region's growth. When the final stamped document landed on my desk, a thick, official seal of approval from the highest regulatory body, I didn't celebrate with champagne. I just sat there, breathing a deep sigh of relief. That paper was worth more than Livia's entire life savings, if she had any. That was the moment the scale truly tipped. Livia, predictably, called again a few weeks later. She sounded bored, calling from some exotic beach whose name she made sure to mispronounce, just to sound more exclusive. Ilara? It's me. Just checking in. Still playing with dirt out at that ruin? She drawled, a laugh track of her friends barely audible in the background. The permit process is lengthy, Livia, I replied, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. It's a headache. I told you. It's cursed property. Just sell the land to some farmer, take the loss, and move on. You're too smart to waste your time on a dump. I'm managing, I said, and hung up before she could respond. The conversation was short, but it reinforced my strategy. The more I complained about the hassle, the less suspicious she would be. Meanwhile, my little dump was undergoing a serious transformation inside. We installed advanced filtration systems, sealed the well, and began construction on the modern control center and events complex, my ultimate, profitable cover. I was turning her trash into an exclusive destination, a symbol of my quiet success. The rumors finally started to trickle in through the family grapevine. My Aunt Carmen, perpetually gossipy, called, concerned about Livia. She's spending too much, Ilara. She's talking about selling some of the jewels soon. She says they're too much trouble to insure. I felt a cold thrill. Livia was falling right into the trap. She was arrogant enough to believe the jewels were her safety net, and impatient enough to sell them the second she needed cash. The confrontation I'd planned was accelerating. It wasn't just about the Moinho anymore, it was about the lie our parents had let her live, a lie I was about to expose. I knew Livia was scheduling an appointment with Don Manuel, the city's most prestigious and discreet jeweler. I even managed, through a carefully placed leak via a shared family friend, to suggest Don Manuel was the only one trustworthy enough for such antique pieces. Livia would take the bait. I just had to wait for the hammer to fall. And the sound of that hammer was going to be the most satisfying music I had ever heard. I didn't need to be in Don Manuel's shop to witness Livia's humiliation. I lived it through the phone call I received immediately afterward, but before that, I received an even more telling call from Don Manuel himself. He was a professional, discreet, and a longtime associate of my father. He gave me a coded warning, a subtle heads-up about the integrity of the pieces Livia had brought in. That was enough. I sat by my phone, the silence between the rings stretching unbearably. I could almost picture Livia, 43 years old, sitting across the antique desk, radiating self-importance, presenting the crown jewels of the family. The smile. The expectant look. The sudden drop when the expert delivered the verdict. The call came from Livia 20 minutes later. I answered on the third ring. Her voice wasn't sweet, it was a tight, desperate choke. Ilara, you knew, didn't you? She whispered, the panic unmistakable. Knew what, Livia? I kept my voice soft, almost sympathetic. They're fakes. All of it. The sapphire necklace, the emerald bracelet, costume jewelry. The jeweler said the real ones were sold years ago. 10 years ago. He said they were liquidated to cover a massive, private debt. I didn't have to feign surprise. The discovery that the jewels were sold wasn't my surprise, that the parents had carried this elaborate charade for a decade, deceiving me while protecting Livia, was the real emotional gut punch. That massive, private debt? It could only be hers. Livia always lived beyond her means. Our parents had used my entire inheritance of sentiment, the sapphires, to bail out their favorite. I paused, letting the silence stretch into the receiver. A debt? What kind of debt, Livia? She didn't answer directly. They had no right. They gave me trash. They sold my inheritance, she screamed, conveniently forgetting the debt was hers in the first place. It sounds like they covered for you, Livia, I stated clinically. They kept your scandal private, leaving you the illusion of wealth and me with, well, the moinho velho. The anger was no longer about the money or the jewelry, it was about the decade of lies. It felt like my childhood, my whole family dynamic, was a beautifully cut fake diamond. It was never about being favored, it was about being shielded. And I was the one left to clean up the mess, both financially and emotionally. The weight of my parents' betrayal felt heavier than the joy of my impending victory. They loved Livia so blindly they compromised their integrity and mine. Livia hung up in a furious, sputtering mess. She was completely broken. Not because of the debt, but because her symbol of superiority, the glittering crown she wore in front of the family, was cheap glass. Later that same day, the news broke. Not just the local paper, but the national business channels. Mega tech poll greenlit, strategic water partnership secured. The article, prominently featuring my holding company, gave a huge, specific shout-out to the historic and sustainable source provided by the Alara Group's Moinho Velho property. The value of the land wasn't just astronomical, it was now legally locked into a partnership that secured its future profitability for the next 50 years. The value of my little ruin had gone from zero to hundreds of millions overnight. Livia had just handed me a kingdom. The phone never stopped ringing. Relatives, old associates, even a few journalists who somehow dug up my old consulting profile. Everyone wanted to know two things: how I, the quiet sister, the unfavorite, had managed to pull off the real estate deal of the century, and where Livia was. I gave terse, professional statements to the press and ignored most of the family. My satisfaction wasn't loud, it was the quiet, deep resonance of a perfectly executed plan. I felt a cold sense of justice wash over me. Livia had relied on surface appearance, the glitter of the jewels, the presumed uselessness of the land, and now the tables had been turned completely. She was left with the surface, and I had the strategic depth. Livia, however, was in full-blown panic mode. She had vanished for a day after the jewel fiasco, likely trying to piece together her ruined finances. When she resurfaced, her voice on the phone was dangerously tight. She wasn't angry anymore, she was scared. The news is everywhere, Alara. That land, that moinho, you knew, didn't you? She accused, skipping right past the replica jewelry. It was always about what I did wrong, never what she did. I only knew what the public knew, Livia. That the region was slated for development, I replied, the lie easy and practiced. What I did know was the value of holding on to long-term permits, something you wouldn't understand. That's a lie. You saw the map. You knew about the water. You tricked me. Her voice cracked, hitting the notes of a desperate child who'd just had their favorite toy taken away. You gave it to me, Livia, I corrected her, calmly. You were the one who assessed its value as zero. You took what you wanted, and I took what you discarded. That's hardly trickery. That's just reading a contract you couldn't be bothered to look at. She started spiraling, moving from accusations to desperate pleas. You have to sell it, Alara. We can split the profits. It was Dad's land. It belongs to both of us. It's only fair. Fairness. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Where was fairness when I was a teenager being punished for something Livia did? Where was fairness when our parents secretly liquidated my sentimental inheritance to cover her debts? The property is legally registered under the Alara Group's holding. It's not Dad's land anymore, Livia. It's mine. Legally. By your own decision. She fell silent for a long moment. I could hear her sharp, ragged breathing over the line. She was hitting the wall of her reality. She was broke, humiliated, and had just traded a multi-million-dollar future for a handful of worthless glass. "I need to see you," she finally choked out. "I need to talk to you face to face." "At the mill." "Tomorrow." A part of me, the old, wounded part, wanted to refuse, wanted to savor the distance. But the new, strategic Alara knew this was the moment. The confrontation had to happen on my territory, on the foundation of the empire she had scorned. "Fine, Livia. Tomorrow morning. But don't expect a handout. This isn't a family visit. This is a business meeting." I hung up, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. I had won the battle, but the war for my own peace was about to be fought on the transformed grounds of the Moinho-Vilho. The next morning, I stood waiting for Livia at the entrance of the newly designed Moinho-Vilho complex. The transformation was breathtaking. The centuries-old structure had been stabilized and elegantly integrated into a sleek, glass and steel building. It was now a premium events center and the main operations hub for my infrastructure holding company. The landscaping was minimalist and expensive. Everything screamed success and strategic investment. Livia pulled up in a borrowed, slightly dinged-up sedan, a sharp contrast to the luxury SUV she used to drive. When she stepped out, she froze. Her eyes scanned the towering glass facade, the pristine grounds, and the heavy security gate. Her designer sunglasses couldn't hide the raw, undisguised shock on her face. The look was a perfect blend of envy, disbelief, and a dawning, terrible understanding. I walked toward her, dressed not in my usual work gear, but in a tailored suit, the uniform of power. "Welcome to the Moinho-Vilho, Livia," I said, my voice cool and calm. She stumbled over her words. This isn't it. Where's the ruin? This isn't that ugly old farm." "It is, Livia. It's just renovated. Professionally." I gestured toward the restored stone walls of the original mill building. "I told you I was busy with permits. I just forgot to mention the subsequent multi-million-dollar construction." Her initial rage gave way to frantic pleading. She followed me into the modern reception area, demanding a lawyer, demanding to see the original documents, demanding her rightful half. "You have to give me half." "It was a mistake." "I made a mistake, Alara, but we are family," she wailed, her voice echoing off the marble floors. I stopped and faced her. "Let's be clear, Livia. You took the jewels, believing they were valuable. You took the sentimental prize. You were willing to accept the shame of taking everything, and you assigned a $0 value to this property. That was your professional judgment. I simply accepted your valuation. I didn't trick you, I just had the patience to see beyond the surface, something you never developed." I pulled out the documents, the clean, legally binding documents she had signed, waiving her rights to the property in exchange for the fake jewels. I showed her the geological survey, highlighting the well. The mill didn't have gold, Livia. It had water. The most valuable resource in the region. "And this," I said, tapping the license papers, "is the right to use it. A right I purchased by selling the apartment I bought with my own hard work." She collapsed into a chair, finally silent. The humiliation was complete. She had lost the jewels in the mill, and she was forced to witness my victory from inside my empire. But what about Dad? What about Mom? They wouldn't have wanted this. "They wanted us to be safe, Livia," I said, feeling a slight tremor in my voice. "They wanted you to be shielded from your debts. And they wanted me to have peace. And for that peace, they left me something else, something only they knew about, hidden here at the Moinho. Something even you never knew existed." Her head snapped up, a flash of pure, animalistic greed returning to her eyes. The thought of a final, hidden treasure was enough to override her despair. Livia followed me like a starved shadow through the hallways, her silence heavy with renewed anticipation. The moment I mentioned something hidden, the desperation vanished, replaced by that familiar, poisonous greed. She wasn't seeking reconciliation, she was hunting for the next score. I led her not to the main vault, but to the original stone foundation of the old mill house. We descended a short, ancient staircase to a small, cool chamber that had been preserved and reinforced. In the center was a small, inconspicuous wall safe, built directly into the original stone. It looked like an afterthought, something simple. I opened it, the combination a strange sequence of our childhood birthdays. Livia gasped, leaning forward as I pulled out a velvet-lined box. It wasn't large or ostentatious. It was simple, dark mahogany. "What is it?" she whispered, her hands twitching. "Is it gold? More jewels?" I opened the box. Inside lay a single, simple, but undeniably authentic sapphire pendant, the original one I'd wanted as a girl, and a pair of matching earrings. They were exquisite, not extravagant, but radiating genuine, centuries-old value. This was the real sapphire collection, a small, final selection that our parents had kept back, not to sell, but as an ultimate gift. Livia stared at the pendant, her breath hitching. Why? Why didn't they leave it for both of us? Why hide it? I reached into the box and pulled out a small, yellowed card, folded neatly under the jewels. It was my father's handwriting, slightly shaky. I read it aloud, my voice cracking slightly. "Elara, my brave one. You always knew the real value of things, not the superficial shine. Use this for your peace. We are sorry for the other lie, but Livia needed the shield more than you needed the stone. Use this to remember that you built your own worth." Livia collapsed onto the damp stone floor, burying her face in her hands. The letter didn't just reveal a treasure, it revealed a truth she couldn't face. Our parents knew who the stronger child was. They protected Livia, the fragile one, but they trusted me, the capable one. The original debt was not just a debt, it was a profound weakness they had tried to hide. The final act was a confession of faith in me. The sight of the jewels, coupled with the final truth of the parents' desperate act to save Livia, was too much for her. In a moment of pure, blinding rage, that raw, animalistic greed, Livia screamed and lunged. She didn't lunge for the jewels. She lunged for my hand, attempting to tear the pendant from my grasp. "You won't have it. You won't have the last laugh," she shrieked, her nails raking against my skin. I stumbled back, shielding the box. The struggle lasted only seconds, but it was brutal, shocking. This wasn't the sophisticated Livia, this was the desperate, cornered rat. She was trying to destroy the only authentic thing left, driven by a desire to obliterate my final validation. I managed to push her away, slamming the coffer shut and securing it. The violence, though brief, left me shaking. I had expected anger, tears, and begging. I had not expected physical assault over a sapphire necklace. Later that afternoon, the phone calls from the extended family began, all spurred by Livia's distraught account. My Aunt Carmen called, weeping. "You must be charitable, Elara. She's family. She's broken. You can't just leave her with nothing." They all expected me to be the bigger person, to give her half the moinho, to forgive and forget. They expected the reliable, quiet Elara to concede. But the old Elara was gone. I was about to make a decision that would defy all their expectations. The shock of Livia's desperate lunge left me numb for the rest of the day. I had won everything, the fortune, the strategic asset, the final, undeniable proof of my parents' trust, yet I felt a profound emptiness. My victory lap had ended with a petty, violent struggle over a small box of jewels. Is this what I had sacrificed my peace for? To see my sister descend into such bitter, destructive madness? I dismissed my staff early, needing the silence of the moinho to think. I walked the quiet halls of my new empire, hearing the echo of Livia's screams. I realized my vengeance wasn't bringing me peace, it was just replacing one family drama with a bigger, more complicated one. My reflection in the high glass windows of the control room showed a woman who looked every one of her 48 years, tired and worn down by decades of familial rivalry. The emotional cost was astronomical. The family calls kept coming, filling my voicemail with a chorus of judgment. Tio Ricardo from Madrid left a stern message: "You are cruel, Alara. You have the moinho, you have enough. Don't let money turn you into a cold stranger." Cold stranger. That stung. They never saw me as anything else, even when I was quietly building my own life while Livia demanded attention. The truth was, my victory was too clean for them. They wanted Livia's dramatic downfall, the rags to riches story reversed. They didn't want the subtle, surgical revenge of financial control. They wanted blood. But giving in to their calls for charity would be the ultimate betrayal of myself. If I gave Livia half, she'd squander it in a year and be back, demanding more, having learned nothing. The cycle would continue. The true victory wasn't financial, it was breaking the cycle of Livia's dependency and the family's enabling. I sat down, reviewing the human resources file for my new complex. We were hiring for entry-level positions: maintenance assistant, administrative clerk, groundskeeper. Low pay, long hours, menial labor. The kind of job Livia wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, the kind of job she'd consider beneath her. An idea started to form in my mind, cold and precise. If I couldn't completely separate myself from Livia, if the family would force this connection on me, then I would redefine the terms of that connection. I would use my victory to enact the most perfect, most long-lasting form of justice and punishment. This wasn't about homelessness. I couldn't morally destroy her life entirely. But I could destroy her ego. I could force her to confront the value of work she always sneered at and make her live every single day under the shadow of the fortune she threw away. I would make her the living embodiment of her own mistake. My decision was final, unconventional, and I knew it would cause outrage. It went against every expectation of family loyalty, but it satisfied the cold, strategic core of my heart. I pulled up Livia's number one last time. The next day, I contacted Livia. She answered warily, her voice subdued after the outburst. I didn't mention the jewels, the property, or the violence. I spoke purely in the language of business. "Livia, I've considered your position. You are currently unemployed, deeply indebted, and without liquid assets. You have no professional references that aren't family members." She started to protest, but I cut her off instantly. "Listen. I'm making you an offer. It's the only offer you will receive from me, or from anyone connected to me, ever again." I paused for effect, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The Alara Group needs an administrative assistant. This role is entry-level. It involves filing permits, managing the flow of supplies, and coordinating with the maintenance team here at the Moinho Velho complex. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Assistant? Alara, I'm a respected social figure. I manage the Junior League events. You are a respected social figure, Livia. And the Junior League events do not pay the bills. This job pays a modest but fixed salary, includes basic health coverage, and provides you with the stability you clearly lack." I then laid down the conditions, the subtle knives of my final revenge. "The job requires you to be physically present at the Moinho Velho from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week. You will take direction from the facility manager. And the most important condition, you will never, ever mention the inheritance, our parents, the jewels, or the past to me, or to any employee here. You are an employee. You are here to work for the company I built on the land you discarded." This wasn't charity. This was servitude. It was forcing her to look up at me, the quiet sister, from the lowest rung of the ladder, every single day, on the property that should have made her wealthy. It was poetic. It was cruel. It was perfect. The silence that followed was agonizing. I could hear her inner battle, the pride, the fury, the shame, all warring against the cold, hard necessity of paying her bills. "You're doing this to torment me," she finally spat out, her voice shaking with hatred. "I'm doing this to ensure you survive, Livia. And to ensure you understand the value of honest labor, something you missed the first 43 years of your life. The alternative is bankruptcy, losing your car, and moving in with Aunt Carmen, who will never stop talking about your failures. The choice is yours." I leaned back in my executive chair, watching the sunlight glint off the polished steel of my new desk. The irony was palpable. The golden child, begging for a job from the scapegoat, on the land she deemed worthless. "I need an answer now, Livia. Yes or no? The position closes this afternoon." The final decision, the one that would seal her fate and mine, hung suspended in the air. I had given her a lifeline, but that lifeline was a chain tethered to my success. I didn't need to destroy her, I just needed to own her dependency. The true test of her pride was in her response. The silence stretched, ticking by like a bomb counting down. I could almost hear Livia's brain calculating the risks, weighing the daily humiliation against the immediate, terrifying threat of destitution. Finally, a small, defeated whisper came through the phone. "Yes, Elara. I'll take the job." The victory didn't feel loud, it felt complete. It wasn't the dramatic fall into the streets the family expected, it was the quiet, constant presence of my success in her life. It was perfect. Livia started her job 2 weeks later. She was late on the first day. She complained constantly about the lack of an espresso machine in the maintenance office. She tried, unsuccessfully, to make friends with the other administrative staff by complaining about her bossy sister, but they saw her for the entitled, middle-aged child she was. My facility manager, Pedro, a man I trusted implicitly, reported everything. She worked, barely, but she worked. This decision, allowing Livia to be my employee, was the one that truly blew up the family dynamic and, eventually, the internet commentators when the story leaked. "It's not fair, Elara. She's getting away with it." Aunt Carmen screamed over the phone. "She's working for you. She always wins." That was the point the rest of the world, and most of my family, missed. My revenge wasn't poverty, my revenge was control. Livia, the golden child who believed she was born to rule, was now forced to live under my direct authority. She had to clock in, take orders from people she considered beneath her, and look at the magnificent Moinho Velho every single morning, knowing she handed it over for cheap replicas. She was constantly reminded that her arrogance was the direct cause of her servitude. This ending, I realized, was designed for engagement, for outrage. People want to see the villain crushed, but I chose a fate worse than homelessness for Livia, eternal, salaried humiliation. She couldn't beg me for money, because she earned a salary. She couldn't leave, because she had nowhere else to go. She was forced to participate in my empire. Did she ever try to sabotage me? Of course. Pedro caught her trying to access the water flow software on a locked terminal 3 months in. I didn't fire her. I simply moved her desk closer to Pedro's, gave her even more menial tasks, and cut her annual raise to 0. The lack of drama was the punishment. I never talked to her outside of work. When she tries to bring up the past, I simply remind her of the conditions of her employment, and she backs down instantly. She's trapped, not by bars, but by her own fear of the shame that awaits her outside my gates. I finally found peace, a deep, quiet peace that comes from knowing you settled the score entirely on your own terms. I didn't need to destroy her life, I just needed to take away her pride and her control. So, here I sit, in my beautiful Moinho Velho. The jewels are in a bank vault, the water flows, and my sister is downstairs filing papers. The family is mad, the commentators are furious that she didn't end up on the street, and Livia herself is miserable but stable. I broke the cycle of abuse and favoritism by turning the abuser into my most loyal, albeit reluctant, worker. That's my story. That's how I turned the trash she gave me into an empire. And that's the final question I want you all to answer. After all, who do you really think won?